Hello, this is Brandon Clayton, and I'm bringing you the topic of language of algebra as we get into pre-algebra here. The questions I want to answer today will be these following questions. What is a variable and a constant? How does one translate from algebraic symbols to words and vice versa? How do you go from words to algebraic symbols? So let's get right into it. What is a variable and what is a constant? In order to answer this question, I want to look at a story, if you will, of these two individuals. We'll call this Greg, and we'll call this one, let's call him Alex. So let's say Greg was currently 15 years old and Alex was 18 years old. So that means they're 3 years apart. And that means that when, let's make a table. So let's say this is Greg and this is Alex. And so that means we say Greg is 15, Alex is 18. I mean, when Greg was 10 years old, how old was Alex? Well, assuming their birthdays is exactly on the same date, we know he's going to be 3 years younger because it was a 3-year difference earlier. So we're going to say, Alex is going to be 3 years older, so 13. And when Greg is 20, we know Alex is going to be 23. And we can continue to do this. Let's just put one more in. So when Alex is, let's say 55, Greg is going to be 58. So what's happening here? We've just identified a variable and a constant. So a variable is something that continues to change because that's the word vary. That's the word that's in there is vary. And constant is a number that's staying the same. So what is varying? Well, Greg's age is varying, and we can let his name or Greg's age be represented by G, and Alex's age be represented by an A. And it doesn't matter which letter you choose. Oftentimes we take the first letter of that item, in this case G and A, but it could be X and Y, D, F, J, whatever you want to, but it just makes more sense this way. So in this instance, Greg can be represented by G, and Alex can actually be represented by G plus 3. What that's saying that this is Greg's age, and Alex's age is going to be whatever Greg's age is plus 3 more. So that's the idea behind a constant and a variable. So a variable, which one is a variable in this case? In this case, what's varying? Well, Greg's age varies, and so does Alex's age varying. But what stays the same each time? No matter what, each time we're having an addition plus 3. So this is our constant. No matter what, this plus 3 stays the same. So in the idea with algebra behind, in the discussion with variables and constant, a constant is a number that's going to stay the same, while a variable, it could be any number. You could plug in for Greg's age or Alex's age in this instance. So if you want a formal definition, we could look at that. And let me erase this. We could look at that as in this way. A variable is a letter that represents a number or quantity whose value may change, and a constant is a number whose value always stays the same. Now looking at this chart, I want to show you some ways that you're going to see this just mathematically speaking, algebraically speaking rather. You're going to see this show up. So let me change my color here to highlight. So let's look at addition. So if I have two variables adding together, it'll look like this, a plus b. And if you wanted to say it, it'd be a plus b. And if you wanted to add these two variables, it'd be the sum, the key word is the sum of a and b. Subtraction, and be a minus b, and the difference of a and b. Multiplication, now pay careful attention to multiplication, because as you can see, there's a number of ways to notate this. So it could look like a times b in this instance where you have a dot in between, or you can have a times b where you have two parentheses around each one, or one of them can have a parentheses and the other not. But as long as they're next to each other, you know that's going to be multiplication. This one sometimes students get mixed up because it looks kind of funky. It doesn't have a operation in between them, but the operation here is understood to be multiplication. A times B is how we say this. Either way, no matter how it's written, it's going to be A times B, and the result is the product. And that's a key word that comes up quite a bit too. The product of A and B is how you could read those. So whatever answer we get, we'll call that the product. So if we said the product with A and B, we'll write it this way. And lastly, division. We can write A divided by B in that way. We can put that slash in between, and this one here as well as this one are the same. Well, all of these are the same thing, but oftentimes you'll see a slash here. This division symbol can be written like that, or it can be written where they're right on top of one another. This was one that we're used to seeing, where you have just a number divided by B. You know, say for instance you have 10 divided by 2. So all four of these are the same for division. Let me erase that so you won't get confused on anything. But all four of these are the same, saying the same thing. Let's go with a different color there. A divided by B is how you'll read all four of those. And the key word here is quotient. If I'm looking for a quotient as a result, that means I'm dividing two things. Now, last couple of points I want to make here regarding variables and constants is, how does one translate from algebraic symbols to words? So let's kind of practice here a little bit, shall we? So let's say I gave you some symbols like this, and this is pretty simple, right? So 3 plus 5. 3 plus 5. How would you say that? Well, I guess I just said it to give you an example. So that could be, you can say that as 3 plus 5, or the sum of 3 and 5. All right, what about this one? So I'll give you a chance to do it before I answer. You can just pause it if you need to. So you should have that one down. It's the same way. You can say this is 2 plus 7, or you can say it's the sum of 2 and 7. Let's try a different one here. Let's do some variables this time. So let's call that y. There we go. So there's a couple of ways you can say that. How would you say this one? I'm hoping you say y minus p, or the difference of y and p. The difference between y and p, or the difference of y and p. So those are a couple of ways you can say this one. What about this? All right, so this one can be read x times y, or the product of x and y. Let's do another little similar to that one. All right, so you see one in parentheses, but they're right next to each other. This would be commonly understood to say the product of A and N, or simply it's A of A and N, or just simply A times N. Now, I probably shouldn't have used this particular couple, because later on in math that'll have a different understanding. But for right now, that's multiplication. We can talk about a series, geometric or arithmetic series. So, but let's do one more, last one that we talked about, and that is, let's try this one. What's the key word we use for that one? So quotient. Let's see if I can spell it right. Quotient. So we can say this is the quotient. What is the quotient of x and y? Of x and y. Or just simply say x divided by y. And we can write it this way, x divided by y. So those are two ways. You can write it this way or this way. Now, let's try it backwards here, and close off this idea. So what if I wanted to go backwards and do words to symbols? So what if I gave you the words? How would you write the following? Pause it if you need to, so that you can guess it before I do so. So how would you write 10 times 3? I'm hoping you wrote it 10 times 3. Or you could have written it 10 times 3. Or parentheses 10 times 3. What about this one? How would you write 7 plus 5? How would you put that into, what is 7 plus 5? Or actually, let me make it a little bit more challenging and say, what's the sum of 7 and 5? So the sum of 7 and 5 is 7 plus 5. And if I said the sum of 3 and 2, again, you can just write that 3 plus 2. The quotient of A and B. What is the quotient of A and B? Well, the quotient is just asking us to divide A by B because we're looking for division. What about the product of P and T? Product is dealing with multiplication, P and T. Make sure we answered all our questions. We will use variables and constants and write symbols to words and go from words to symbols. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Brandon Clayton, and I hope you found that helpful.